Well, hey, everybody, this is Matt Dabbs at Discipleship.org. I'm here with Ken Adams of the Crossroads Church and Impact Ministries in Newnan, Georgia. We're actually maybe an hour apart here. I'm down in Auburn, right down I-85. So maybe we could have met up and done this in person. Didn't really think about that, but we're here, and we were just catching up a little bit beforehand, talking about all the fruit that's come from the years in ministry there in Newnan that Ken has done in the Impact Ministries with discipleship. And we're going to be talking about discipleship in the local church. And I was just super encouraged by what you were sharing with what's happened there in Newnan. So can you fill them in a little bit on what you were telling me?
Yeah, Matt, it's good to be with you, man, and to be on the podcast. And so, a little bit of our journey is that I've had the opportunity to pastor Crossroads Church now for right at 35 years, and so I came out of seminary back in 1989 with the Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, and then God brought me back to the South. Wasn't planning on being here, but I'm glad that I ended up here, and so I came back to really kind of my home state, real close to my hometown, and we just had the privilege, the opportunity to get to plant a brand new church, and we went through all that same journey that every church planter's ever been through. Trying to get a group started, trying to get facilities and get resources to make it work and all that, and so we just had a great opportunity in front of us. But when we started, there was a couple of things we really wanted to do. One is that we really wanted to be a church that was a disciple making church, and so we didn't even really, to be honest, we didn't really even know exactly what that looked like when we started. But I had some experiences discipling some people, some young men before that, and some churches that I've been in, some student ministry things. And so I just knew that's what we needed to do as a church. And so we set out to do that. And then we also set out just to be a church planting church. And so we felt like that if God had given us birth, the right thing to do would be to turn around and help give birth to other churches, right? So that's a no-brainer. But anyway, that's what we did. And man, God has given us just some favor and some blessing. And we've been able to plant literally dozens of churches around the state of Georgia, as well as some other areas in the U.S. And then internationally, He's even given us an opportunity to plant just a number of churches there. We've helped to plant churches in Brazil and in Serbia and in Montenegro and in India, and then also in most recently in Cambodia. And so it's just been a huge blessing to be able to go out and help get other churches planted. But what's cool, Matt, is that we're trying not just to start churches, we're trying to start disciple making churches so that they continue to multiply and they literally outlive us and continue to influence people for Christ until He returns. So yeah, man, we are very committed to that, and just have been swinging at it. We wouldn't dare say that we have figured anything out or have any secret sauce or anything like that. But we're swinging at it about as hard as anybody I think I know. So we'll take credit for that at least.
That's awesome. And there was one thing you said that I don't know how frequent this happens, but talk about like grandkid churches.
Oh yeah. So we've actually had an opportunity to not only start churches, but we've had churches that we've started that have started other churches. And so just this past in the last 2 weeks, I've had a chance to preach at one of our daughter churches, actually do some training in another daughter church, and then get to preach this past weekend at one of our granddaughter churches. So that's that. I don't think, Matt, I don't think that happens unless you plant yourself for a few years somewhere, And so we're beginning to experience some of the, I guess, benefits of longevity, if you will. It's just trying to stay obedient in the same direction for a long period of time, right?
Yeah,
So
that's
there.
little Eugene Peterson there. Was it long
Yes.
obedience, the same direction or something like that? Yeah,
Something like that. Yeah.
that's so good. You're living it.
Yeah. I'm glad you knew who it came from.
That's good. That I just ran across a word yesterday. The word was cryptonesia, and it was a word that means you heard it somewhere, forgot it, and thought it was your original idea.
That's
I didn't know there was the word for
that
that.
man, that happens to me more than you know. That's incredible.
I think it's a daily happening for us humans, really. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's a beautiful thing, and I love that you're living that. So it sounds to me like if you get serious about making disciples, then like churches start happening.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I think that's part of the byproduct of making disciples. I do think you have to be intentional about that, but I do think that's that if you're committed to a lifestyle of reproduction and of multiplication, I think that would be the natural outflow of that.
Yeah. How did that get put on your radar back in '89?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I guess I first got my first real, uh, I guess, introduction or involvement in disciple making actually came as a result of my wife. She was actually a part time student director in a church not far from where we live, and she asked me if I'd go lead this retreat, speak at this retreat. I wasn't planning to be a pastor, really wasn't going into ministry or anything like that. But I said, I think that'd be cool. I'd like to do that. And I was more interested in spending a week with her at the beach than I was really speaking opportunity. But God had another thing in store, and we actually had a revival. Man, it was so cool, Matt. And as a result of that, there was about 5 or 6 guys in that group that I just knew that they needed to have some follow up, and they needed to have somebody pouring into their lives and invest in them. If they didn't, I knew that they were going to end up pretty much going back to where they had been before the retreat, and so I didn't want to see that happen. And honestly, nobody had ever discipled me, so I didn't know much about discipleship, but I did know that Jesus did it. And so I was actually living at my parents' house at the time. And so these guys would come over once a week. We would meet in the basement of their house and where we lived. And every week we would just open God's word, share life together, hold each other accountable, pray for each other, memorize scripture together. I mean, all those things that are part of just trying to really be iron against iron, help each other grow. And so out of that group, I've literally watched those men's lives change. They were just teenagers at the time, but over the years, 2 of them ended up in full-time ministry. Another one served for a while as a administrator in a church. One of them became an elder in a church that we later planted. And I just saw fruit like I'd never seen it before. Obviously, some of that down the road, but I was seeing it in the beginning stages of their life. So I ended up taking a couple of other ministry roles after that. And I just knew that if I was going to do the same thing for the rest of my life. And so I did it in a couple of other churches. And then when I had the opportunity to come and actually pastor a church plant, it was a no brainer for me. I just knew that we were going to be a church that was committed to making disciples. And then honestly, the church planting piece really was just kind of uh, about 10 years down the road, I realized that we needed to begin to multiply not just disciples, but we needed to multiply disciple making churches. And of course, there's a little bit of a story behind that too, but maybe for another time we can talk
Okay.
about that. So all of this just kind of has come out of our journey, really, and just uh, sort of being focused on trying to really to just complete the work that God's given us to do, right? And that really comes out of John 17:4. That was Jesus's one of his final prayers, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah. So I guess that's the best way to describe it.
Oh, thank you for that. So I think it's in Todd Wilson's book Multipliers. He gives the statistic that says 99% of churches don't make it to 100 years old.
Well,
And then you think, okay, well, when were most of our churches planted? If they were planted in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that post World War II boom, 40s, 50s, 60s makes them 60, 70, and 80-ish years old for the most part. So that means if you're not birthing new churches,
mm,
like there's not going to be churches. So
Right.
and there will be always on some level, but you understand. I mean, just systematically, when you look at that, you're saying, man, you're doing such a good work
Yeah.
with that. Um,
Well,
so
Matt,
uh,
I think you could draw a parallel there to biological age, right? And so, if as humans we're not reproducing, sooner or later we die out, right? So, yeah,
yeah,
I think it's a
exactly.
parallel there.
Exactly. And I like Robert Dale's work. It's kind of dated now, but he kind of gives the bell curve of
Yeah,
a the church life and to dream again, and
yeah,
if you start questioning and enter into nostalgia, if it don't re-envision or dream or birth or something to inflect back up again and start the curve over again, and a lot of churches kind of hit that peak and decline and they don't know how to turn that back up again
right.
into new vision or new birth, and y'all have does that reinvigorate the church? What happens when you birth a church or big announcement on Sunday, grandbaby has arrived, what is that like in I hate to say mothership church, but like
Well,
original church?
that's the phrase we hear a lot, so I understand that, but yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting for the folks in our church to know that we're getting to help, plan a new work of God and help start something new. And, obviously, they love to hear the stories that go with that. And so it's funny that you say that because I'll be back at Crossroads Noonan this weekend. And, I will start my message by telling people where I've been for the last couple of weeks. And so, just the fact that I share that, uh, I think everybody's going to feel like that's what we want to be a part of. That's why we're doing what we're doing. And so, I could just not say anything about that, and they would, wonder what in the world you've been doing. But I'll see that as an opportunity to cast a little vision, and I'll tell a little bit about what we've done and why I've been gone for the last couple of weeks, and I think I'm sure that people will really resonate with that, and they'll be excited about that. So it does create a little bit of excitement among our people. So
It makes me think a little bit about Jesus parables, and maybe it's Matthew 13. He gets into the different seed parables and how the mustard seed just invades everything. It just gets into everything. The kingdom gets into everything. And then,
yeah,
like, the way we structure churches often feels like we're trying to contain it. We're trying to kind of wall it in. So, like, if we celebrate something, it's like, look at our children's ministry, look at our youth ministry. And those are wonderful. Like, celebrate them. Like, when they grow, celebrate all the wins. How cool it is also to be able to go, like, look, the kingdom is invading over here in this new area.
yeah,
And like, God put that on our hearts and we're seeing the fruit. Like, that's just so cool. I love
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. That is good. That's a great connection there. I like that.
Well, tell us a little bit about Impact Discipleship Ministries and how you all help people and churches, and just share a little bit of your heart on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, actually Impact is is a ministry that has more or less it's just been the byproduct of what we're doing at Crossroads Church. And so every single thing that we do through Impact has originally been sort of tested and tried in Crossroads in a local church. And so I tell people a lot of times that what Crossroads has given us the opportunity to do over 35 years is that we've just been a laboratory. I mean, really, Matt, we just tried. I can tell you more things not to do than I can tell you to do. And so I've kind of become the master of how not to make it work. But honestly, when you have an environment with leaders that give you the freedom to try different things, to try to figure out what does it mean to be a disciple making church, then that is an opportunity that you just don't get very often. And so, as a result of that, we got to a point where we said, you know what, because we knew how important it was for us to have this. We need to share this with other people. We need to let other churches figure this out. And honestly, and you know this to be true, the more churches the more pastors you talk to, the more you realize there is not enough disciple making going on. In fact, I will tell you that I had a guy tell me this, a good friend of mine who you would know his name if I told you, but he's the leader of a global network of disciple making. And he made a statement to me years ago. He said, I don't know one church, and I think he has the credibility to say this. He said, I don't know of one church in all of North America that is truly a movement of multiplying disciples. And this was about 33 years ago. And so when he said that, my first thought was, what a sad commentary on the Church of Jesus Christ. If a guy in his position can't think of one church in all of North America with all the resources that we have, and if he can say that, then that's a sad commentary. But then the second thing I thought was, well, if there's not one, then we take that personally, and we're going to try to be one. Then we're going to try to see that happen. And so, again, I had never been discipled, and didn't really, honestly, as you know, a lot of our seminaries, although I think I had a great seminary, it did not prepare me for how to lead the church to be a disciple making movement. In fact, I didn't even hear about that in seminary. Nobody ever said a word about it. I had never been under any pastoral examples or models of a disciple making leader. And so I certainly didn't get that or glean that, but I took that statement, very personal, and said, you know, we're going to do what we can to figure that out of how to become a disciple making movement. And then again, as we have learned that and we have grown, through that journey, through that process, we've just felt like it's our responsibility to pay it forward, right? And steward that, and help other churches and other pastors figure that out. I'll never forget one time I was in a pastor's roundtable. It was a luncheon and put on by our denomination. And I was facilitating this roundtable, and one of the guys on the panel asked if he could ask a question. And I said, sure, absolutely. And so in a room of about 70 or 80 pastors and staff members, he asked this question. He said, how many of you have ever been personally discipled? And less than a third of the hands in the room went up. And I just immediately said, man, we can do better than that. In my mind, this is the equivalent of saying a third of our military know how to shoot a gun. And so I just felt like, man, we've got to do something about that. And uh, so, uh, so Impact is really committed to coming alongside churches, helping them figure out sort of the ministry action plan for how to become disciple making churches. We try to come along pastors because you know this, that as the pastor goes, the church goes. And so we want to try to help pastors become disciple making pastors. We want to help churches become disciple making churches. And so the way we do that is that we've created resources and tools. That's all they are. It's just tools to do that. We've also tried to create some training opportunities for churches and pastors. And so we do a number of different things, you know, opportunities that God gives us to come alongside churches and to help them figure this thing out. And hopefully that's going to grow the kingdom, right? And hopefully that's going to make a difference. We've got plenty to do at Crossroads, but we don't really necessarily need more to do. But man, if we can help the kingdom grow, why wouldn't we want to be about that, right? So,
Man. You said at first you were talking about how you feel like you've made more mistakes than you've made successes, or however it was that you said that. It got me thinking a little bit about how kind of our American values. We want to be the winner. We want to succeed. We don't like seeing failure. It's like I sometimes wonder if we expect more of our pastors than Jesus. Like Jesus lost one, and then the other 11 all ran away. And then one of them, denied him three. I mean, the whole thing, it was like, we're not going to do better than Jesus. And they all mess up. So like this whole aversion to failure, like, is just a death nail in the coffin. It's like, you got to embrace failure if you're going to succeed,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we learn.
Yes. Is there a lesson that y'all learned from something that didn't go well? Or two?
Well, I mean, is there a lesson? Which one do you want? But I think one of the things that I think there are a couple of things that come to mind, but one of the things is I think we tried changing too many things too often. changed structures, changed systems, changed, you know, uh, curriculum, things like we just, for a while there, we were just changing so much so fast. And it was because we just kept trying to figure out how to do it better. And, I would say that today, 35 years into it, we probably have more clarity, and we are probably, more locked in on what we're doing and how we're doing it than we ever have been. So today change is slow. We're not changing a whole lot. But again, that's probably because we've begun to see it work. And just to be honest with you, the reason that it's working is because I think we're doing it the way Jesus designed it to be, um, you know, 2000 years ago. And so, Matt, we know that, it's not about the latest and greatest. It's not about what's new and improved. It's about what's tested and tried and what's proven. And if you just do it the way Jesus did, I mean, honestly, the principles of disciple making that Jesus used 2000 years ago, they are just as timeless today as they were back then. I mean, and in fact, we have so much more. I mean, here you and I are doing this call over a computer that that didn't even exist obviously back then, and in technology and facilities and all the things that we have. Imagine how much more we ought to be doing it, making disciples of all nations today, because of what we have than they did 2000 years ago. So
Yeah.
that's another,
Yeah, go ahead.
that's another podcast.
Yeah, there we go. Get some spinoffs here. So so how do you come alongside a church? What are some of the things that you offer resource wise, in person? Is it all online? Can you kind of explain how you operate?
Yeah, exactly. So we do a couple of things. One is we try to come alongside churches, and we can come in and we can do a consultant uh, uh, approach, and we can come in and say, let's take a look at where you are. Let's talk about where you want to be. We provide a training resource called the Disciple Making Church, where we come in and talk about the components that Jesus used to start a movement and multiplying disciples. But then we try to take those components and figure out how does that fit into their existing format, right? So you don't have to always blow everything up to become a disciple making church. Sometimes it's more about tweaking what you already have and maybe adding a few things that you're not doing. And we come alongside churches somewhat in a consulting role. Obviously, we do training that people can just take part in. We do these disciple making church conferences whenever somebody asks us to come, but we invite other churches to come alongside and be a part of that. And we do have an online version of it as well. You go to our website, which is impactdisciples.com. You can get access to all this, find out more about this. And so we do the seminars, we do training events. We also have an online equipping process that we call the making of a disciple making pastor. And so it's about a 7-week process where we just talk about what we believe based on the life of Jesus, what we believe are the 6 priorities of a disciple making pastor. And so those are the things that we do to really kind of come alongside of churches and pastors. But we also have, a monthly podcast that we do that you can see it on Facebook, you can see it on our podcast, you can see it on YouTube, all those platforms, iTunes, and then also we have a blog that we do through impactdisciples.com, and so a lot of the things that other organizations do, we do as well, and we think that if we can help a church to just again figure out from where they are to where they want to be, and we can you know come alongside them, we love doing that. I will say this because I just had an opportunity to do this weekend, that one of the things that I like people to know is that if we come into a church and we do our seminar, our consulting, or our training, um, what you're gonna learn is you're just gonna learn uh, what Jesus did 2,000 years ago. And if our resources or our tools can help you, then that's great, but you can do it without our tools and our resources. And so, you know, you really and truly, I just had this conversation with the pastor and this weekend, is that if you bring us in, you really, and we're able to help you, you lose nothing. In fact, what you do is you just you get another insight into what did Jesus do, And so,
Mhm.
uh, you've probably heard this before, but someone said if you if you try to make disciples, it may or may not lead you to Jesus, but if you look at Jesus, it will lead you to making disciples. And so that's what we do. We just point people to Jesus, and we literally just show you how we see it in the life of Christ and how He did it, and then as a result of that, you just glean those principles that are applicable in the way we do it today in local churches. And then again, just make the adjustments to figure out how does this fit within your structure, because everybody's got a little bit of a different structure to work through.
That's so good. Um, so what would a typical, like if you think of a typical church that has reached out, um, kind of like what position do you typically find them in? And then like, what does that look like as you kind of come alongside or kind of the timeline of that? And what are they looking for?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question, because I have to say that a lot of times churches that we connect with, um, as you would imagine, sometimes they're kind of struggling, right? They're struggling. Uh, they're struggling to grow. Some of them are in decline. Some of them are just kind of at the end of their rope going, what do we do? And so they hear about what we do. They're interested in what we do. And so we try to come in, really, we try to take the approach of revitalizing their church. And sometimes that means helping them find a pastor. Sometimes it means just helping the pastor that they have get a vision, or not a vision, but getting an understanding of disciple making. So sometimes that's the case, but not always. We have a handful of churches that we're working with that are actually, very dynamic, growing, healthy churches that just have been exposed to disciple making, and really and truly, because they don't usually get it in seminary and they don't have a lot of models to look up to. They have sought us out, and we've been able to say, hey, we can help you with what we've learned, and we can obviously point you to the one that we all need to learn from. And so yeah, we do have a variety of churches coming to us from different stages and phases of church life. And so um, it seems like a lot of times it's churches that are struggling, but it's not always the case. The pastor that I had a chance to speak with this weekend, his church is fairly young, and it's healthy and it's growing, and they know that there's a piece missing, and that is that developing disciple piece that's missing.
Mm, gotcha. Well, sometimes the churches who are, this is a sometimes statement, not a general, universal
Sure.
statement. If church is struggling and kind of going, downhill, it's hard sometimes to have the vision to reach out. And that sometimes that's why they're having such a hard time.
Mhm.
If you're open and willing to receive help, that's probably a really healthy sign. If you're unwilling to listen to outside input, which happens sometimes in churches, you're probably not
Right.
on a good path. So I would imagine you're probably at least getting churches that are healthy enough to say, we recognize that, we need help and we don't quite know what we're doing here.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that's true. I think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's really great that there are churches that have that laid upon their hearts because as we know, like been mentioned a lot, Discipleship.org, the national study that was done in 2019, that found that less than 4% were, like really serious about churches. Less than 4% of churches were really serious about making disciples. So as you said earlier, there's just a tremendous need for this. But like you also said on the individual level, people were like, I was never discipled. I don't know how to disciple. Like, where do I start? And now you got the corporate level where the church is like, we've never seen this done on the church level, so how
Mm.
how do we get started? And so it's really great that y'all are able to plug right in there. And it sounds like you're able to contextualize your approach to like their situation and find a fit that works for where they're at. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in terms of, your question there, I believe that disciple making can happen in a church that's very traditional and that's got Sunday school and maybe that has traditionally been a program driven church. But I also know that we can come alongside churches that maybe are a little bit more contemporary and maybe they have more small group type ministry because and I think you probably know this to be true, Matt, that just because a church has a small group ministry does not mean that they're a disciple making church or that they have disciple making small groups. And so those are two very different things. Even at our church, we have two different, really three or four different types of small groups, but we have certain groups that are specifically what we call impact groups, and those groups are really where we do ministry training, and that's really where the DNA of our church and the life of Christ is really uh, where people are trained and equipped in that. Um, so there are different, styles of churches and different ways churches are structured and organized, but the component of making disciples, man, it weaves through every single type of church. It's transcendent, right? It just crosses all barriers, man. So again, one thing that just came to my mind as you were talking. I, I guess I'll just add this is that one of the big things we've learned early on is that there is a huge difference between a church with discipleship and a disciple making church. A disciple making church or a church with discipleship usually sees discipleship as another program that they add on to everything else they're doing. And a disciple making church, discipleship is a part of it, but disciple making is all we do, not just one thing we do. It's all we do. I mean, in fact, if you go back and look at Jesus, Jesus didn't see discipleship as one part of a program. Discipleship was a part of a process called disciple making. He was taking them from really being untrained seekers to become fully trained disciples. He was reaching people from the culture and he was sending them out. And so that was not in any way a program. That was all a process that took 3 years to get them to the point that he could turn them loose and they would continue the mission. And look where we are 2,000 years later. I mean, here you and I are talking about it thousands of miles from where he started it and thousands of years from when it began. And it's hard to argue with those results, man.
Well, God, as you said, he works in process and process takes time is what you're saying. And that, um,
Mhm.
the programmatic fix is often like, we'll hand us the program, we'll implement, and 13 weeks from now, we'll have X, Y, and Z result, So how do you come into a church and spend just this whatever amount of time with them, but also help them get on a trajectory or a process that plays out over time without maybe that it's not like you're coming back every week. So
Right.
how do you get them on that path?
Right. So again, we kind of begin with an assessment, and say, where are you at and how are you, what are you doing well? What do you need to improve in? And then after we do an assessment, then we'll come in and we'll really basically give them sort of a, a prescription, if you will, sort of um, a ministry action plan of what do we need to do? How do we change this? Because it's if you really want, and Matt, will help people at whatever level they want, but for the church that you're talking about, where somebody said, really help us become that disciple making church. It's not just adding curriculum, right? If they really want to change the whole process, then they need some help to figure out also the evangelism piece. They need to understand, they really need to go back and understand what the target is that they're hitting, that they're aiming for anyway. Then they need to have a strategy. Then they need to understand the right type of environments. And then they need to understand how to raise up leaders that are helping to drive that. And that's a big overhaul. That's a big process right there. Some big things you got to work on. And so we come alongside and give people that prescription, if you will, and then we try to help them with the implementation of that, right? So So once they figure out where they want to go, and then once they, get some actual action steps to say, here's the things to work on. What do we do to reach the culture? What do we do to get people connected from the crowd into community? What do we do to get people into this disciple making core? How do we do that? So we're going to give them very clear action steps to do that. And then we're going to help them figure out how do you implement that. In some churches, it's just a matter of depending on kind of the size of the church and where they are. Every church is different. Some churches, it might just mean that the pastor starts a group, and then that group multiplies groups and multiplies groups, and that's their implementation. For some churches, they can find qualified leaders, because it always comes back to qualified leaders. They can find qualified leaders, really, really sort of fast track them to becoming ready to lead, and then they can start multiple groups, and again, putting all the other pieces. It's not just starting groups. It's about really shaping the overall process. And then once you do that, then you come back, and we do try to come back and do follow up with the churches that we're trying to help. So really, it's just 3 steps. It's assessment, it's kind of prescription, and then it's implementation. And so once that happens, and we, anytime we go in and help a church, we're always going to be available and accessible to them, to come alongside them, and really try to offer some coaching for
Yeah.
at least 6 months, something like that.
Wow, that's awesome. So, so you all have the time in person, I guess, boots on the ground, on site,
Mhm.
and then you have your resources online. You have your podcast. You have some coaching. Is there any other kind of like service that you offer for churches?
Well, we do have this annual conference called the Disciple Making Summit, which is just another way to expose people to disciple making principles and to disciple making approach. So we just had it. We do it every January at the end of the month, and so we just had it. We'll do another one again next year. So yeah, so that's pretty much what we do. We provide lots of free resources online. People can just go and check it out, and really, to be honest with you, everything we do, it's free. I mean, we do have a suggested price for everything, but really and truly, I mean, we're trying to see the Great Commission fulfilled around the world, and so we're not going to make it. If somebody can't afford it, we're going to do it no matter what. So Jesus has told us to do that. He'll take care of the rest, right?
That's so good. And y'all are living it out. This is the fruit and the outflow of real implementation over decades,
Yeah,
with that wealth of knowledge and that faithfulness
yeah.
is really a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, man, I need to stay. God's called me to be a pastor of a local church, and I need to stay there because I'm a general practitioner. I'm just I'm I do. Here's the thing, Matt, is that when I get to speak to a group of pastors, I can say with integrity, I do everything they do. I do weddings, I do funerals, I do meetings, um, I lead a staff. I mean, I do all the above, right? I do a sermon every week, and so I can say that I know what they face, and I am in the same battle that they're in. Um, I'm not in a position where I just go around and do this as a consultant and that kind of thing. It would be fun to do that. I wish I had the time to do that, but but no, I can relate to where a pastor is, because first and foremost, that's what I am and that's what I do.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for blessing us here on this podcast and
Thanks for
on
having me.
the YouTube channel. Truly inspirational what God is doing through you. It's all His work. He gets all the glory for it.
Amen.
You
Yeah,
all just keep
amen.
showing up and doing what He's showing you to do and passing that on to others. So it's a
Yeah,
wonderful thing. Thank you so much.
you bet. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, it's been good. Any last thoughts for us?
Ah, man, I love what, I just shared this weekend. I love what I heard, Francis Chan say one time. He said, "When I tell my teenage daughter to go clean her room, what do you think I mean?" And he says, "Clean your room," right? And he doesn't mean, go write books about cleaning your room or do conferences about cleaning your room or, go memorize clean your room. I literally mean clean your room. And so I just challenge people when Jesus said, make disciples, just make a commitment to hand to the plow, just keep making disciples, every year of your life, pour into a group of people, and it will be the best investment of your life. And the you may not see it, you may not be able to count it, but the dividend and the return on your investment will be way beyond what you could ever think or imagine. So
Amazing.
that's what I would say.
Yeah. Thank you, Ken. You're a blessing.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, brother.